Imagine you're driving a beat-up car at 100 kilometers per hour, but there is a catch. The windshield has been painted pitch black. You cannot see the road ahead. You don't know if 50 meters away lies a deadly curve, a steep cliff, or a straight highway. The only thing you have is a tiny rear-view mirror showing you what is already passed. How do you feel? Fear. A primal fear spreading through your chest. That is exactly how humanity has felt about the economy for thousands of years of history. We have lived, worked, invested, and saved in a state of partial blindness. We only know about a crisis when it is already struck, destroying homes, stealing jobs, and blowing away our savings. We look into the rearview mirror, historical data, and ask, why did this happen? But stand completely helpless before what is to come. This uncertainty is not just annoying, it is the source of suffering. Have you ever felt anger when gas prices suddenly double? Or the helpless fatalism when interest rates dance around crushing your dream of buying a house? That is the price of driving without seeing the road. But then, in the 20th century, a group of brilliant minds emerged with a crazy ambition. They didn't want to just look at the rearview mirror anymore. They wanted to tear off the black paint on the windshield. They wanted to build a machine capable of seeing the future. The leader of that revolution, the grand architect of these maps of the future, was Lawrence Klein, the man who brought home the Nobel Prize in economics in 1980. He didn't use a crystal ball or tarot cards, he used mathematics. But do we really want to know the future? Or is ignorance the only sedative for this society? Before we dive deep into Lawrence Klein's brain, let's step back a bit to understand the chaos of the historical context. This is where you need to activate your intellectual superiority to recognize the naivety of humanity in the past. For a long time, economics was more like a philosophical debate than an exact science. Brilliant economists like Adam Smith or David Ricardo sat in smoke-filled rooms writing lengthy essays about the invisible hand or comparative advantage. They used words, logic, and arguments. It sounded nice, very pleasing to the ear. But there was a fatal problem. They couldn't measure it. Saying when supply increases, price decreases is one thing, but decrease by how much? For how long? And what if, at the same time, taxes go up and wages go down? Flowery words could not answer specific numbers. When the Great Depression of 1929 struck, sweeping away the assets of millions, classical economists could only stand and watch in astonishment. Their theories were beautiful, but useless against the storm of reality. The world needed something harder, something colder. That was when Lawrence Klein stepped onto the stage, not as a philosopher, but as an engineer. He brought with him a weapon that the traditional economic establishment of the time both despised and feared: econometrics. Don't let this dry name fool you. Think of it like this. If the economy is a complex human body that is sick, then the old economists were healers, guessing the illness through intuition. And Lawrence Klein? He was the first to propose, why don't we take X-rays, run blood tests, and feed all those indicators into a computer so it can tell us exactly where the cancer cells are? Klein believed that the economy, no matter how chaotic, operates according to underlying rules, and if it has rules, it can be rewritten in the form of mathematical equations. Don't panic at the equation above. It is simply an haughty assertion by Klein. I can calculate the consumption behavior of an entire nation based on their income, and I will find the mysterious constants that control this game. This is not just science. This is an attempt to decode God. Klein wanted to transform economics from a soft social science into a hard science, on par with physics or chemistry. He wanted to create a miniature model of the entire world in a laboratory where he could turn a screw, like raising taxes, and see how the machine would vibrate before applying it in real life. However, there is a cruel paradox. The more humans try to control chaos, the more they realize how small they are.
Lawrence Klein was about to discover that building a model is easy, but facing the human element within the numbers is the real nightmare.
So what did Lawrence Klein do differently to deserve the 1980 Nobel Prize? Why did his work make governments from the US to Asia bow down and listen? Visualize the economy as a giant, tangled electrical grid. Before Klein, people only saw individual light bulbs, microeconomics, or the entire city lit up, theoretical macroeconomics. But no one could draw the wiring diagram of the whole system. Klein created macroeconometric models. These were not the simple charts on Excel you see today. In the 1940s and 50s, when computers were as big as a room and weaker than a primary school student's pocket calculator, Klein started building massive systems of equations. His most famous work, the Wharton model, was a data monster. It didn't just have one or two equations, it included hundreds, even thousands of equations running in parallel. Describes how citizens shop, describes how companies invest, describes how the government collects taxes, describes how the price of wheat affects the price of bread, and how the price of bread affects inflation. The magic, and also the terrifying part, is that these equations are interconnected. The result of one equation is the input for another. Klein created a primitive digital twin of the American economy. Why does this matter to your life? Remember the feeling of righteous anger when the government enacts a wrong policy. For example, they print more money for relief, but inadvertently cause the price of your breakfast bowl of pho to double. Before Klein's models, policymakers often acted on trial and error. They were like surgeons operating while guessing which nerve to cut so the patient wouldn't die. Klein gave them a simulation room. With his model, the US president could ask, if I cut taxes by 10% tomorrow, what will the unemployment rate be next year? Klein's machine would run the algorithms, calculate millions of cross-interactions, and spit out a forecast number. This is validation for the power of knowledge. For the first time, humans felt they held the handle of the knife. We were no longer victims of random economic storms. We were engineers operating the machine. But there is an interesting backstage detail that few know, a detail that exposes the fragility of these forecasts. That was when Klein realized that no matter how perfect the mathematical model is, it always fails before a single variable.
We paused at a brutal truth. Lawrence Klein had built a magnificent prophecy machine, but it had a fatal blind spot. That blind spot was humanity. To understand this tragedy, compare economics to physics. If you were a physicist and you drop a stone from a height, you can calculate exactly where it will fall. The stone doesn't think. The stone doesn't know you were watching it. The stone doesn't suddenly decide, today I feel like flying up to the sky instead of falling down. But humans do. Klein's models relied on the assumption that past behavior would repeat in the future. But when governments used his models to intervene in the market, citizens, those cunning and adaptive creatures, began to change their behavior to cope. Imagine a real-life example. The government uses Klein's model and sees, if we impose a high tax on new cars, people will postpone buying cars. Sounds reasonable. But in reality, when rumors of the impending tax hike spread, people don't postpone, they rush to buy cars immediately before the law takes effect, creating a frantic price fever completely contrary to the forecast. This is where fatalism creeps into the minds of policymakers. They realize they are playing a game of cat and mouse with millions of people. Klein gave them a map, but the terrain of that map changes right under their feet with every step they take. However, Klein's greatest contribution didn't stop at forecasting within a single nation. He did something unprecedented, something that permanently changed how we view today's globalized world. Project Link. Does a sneeze on Wall Street really give all of Asia the flu? Before Klein, that was just a joke. After Klein, it became a mathematical equation.
In the 1960s, the world was deeply divided by the Iron Curtain. The West and the East differed not only in ideology, but their economies were considered separate islands indifferent to one another. Lawrence Klein
with a vision ahead of his time, rejected this division. He realized a truth that we find obvious today: no nation is an island. He initiated Project Link. The idea sounded crazy at the time: connect the economic models of dozens of countries together into a global supermodel. Think of it like assembling Lego. The US economic model is one Lego block. Japan's model is another block. Klein found the connectors. For example, Japan's exports are precisely the US's imports. He wrote algorithms so that when you change interest rates in the US, the computer runs a lap around the Earth and tells you how Japan's GDP will fluctuate. Why does this matter to you? Recall the 2008 financial crisis. A bank in the US collapsed, and suddenly a garment worker in Vietnam lost their job. Why? Because the circulatory system of the global economy had been connected. Klein was the first to draw that circulatory diagram. He showed us the fragility of interdependence. But behind the scientific glory is a human story full of obstacles. Klein was not the darling of the American political establishment from the start. In fact, he was a victim of fear during the McCarthyism era, a time when America hunted down those with communist ideologies. In his youth, Klein had joined the American Communist Party, not uncommon for intellectuals during the Great Depression. Because of this past, despite his brilliance, he was denied tenure at the University of Michigan in 1954. He was forced to leave his homeland, moving to Oxford University in England to find sanctuary. Feel the righteous anger here. A genius mind, wanting to save the economy, was rejected for political reasons. But it was this time in exile in Europe that gave Klein a global perspective, laying the foundation for Project Link later on. The irony of fate is this: the outcast became the one to connect the world. But even as he was honored, the ghost of failure lurked. In the 1970s, Klein's machine crashed into a stone wall.
We are living in the era of big data and AI. Google knows what you want to buy before you even think of it. But beware, the lesson from Klein's failure in the 1970s is a chilling warning for today's digital age. In the 1970s, the world faced stagflation, a nightmare that Klein's models could not explain. Why? Because Klein's models, based on Keynesian theory, focused too much on demand, what people buy, what governments spend. It assumed that supply, oil, raw materials, was always abundant and stable. Then the 1973 oil crisis hit. Oil prices quadrupled. Klein's machine was like a self-driving car, perfectly programmed for asphalt roads, suddenly thrown into a swamp. The equations crumbled. The computer predicted low inflation, but reality saw skyrocketing inflation. The computer said to print money, but the more money was printed, the higher prices rose and the higher unemployment climbed. What is the lesson here? Models only work well on sunny days. When a black swan event appears, all algorithms become meaningless. Relating to today, quantitative funds on Wall Street are using descendants of Klein's models, 1 billion times more complex, to trade stocks using high-speed AI. They believe they have controlled risk, but do you feel a personalized fear when your retirement funds and savings are being managed by algorithms that have never experienced a global pandemic or a nuclear war? Klein taught us we can model everything except the madness of the real world. He won the Nobel Prize not because he was perfectly right, but because he gave us a methodology to try to understand, knowing that understanding always has limits. So what is Lawrence Klein's final legacy? Should we throw away all forecasts and live adrift in the current of life, or is there another, wiser approach? We have journeyed through history, from the smoke-filled rooms of philosophers to the supercomputers of the Cold War. But the story of Lawrence Klein does not end in the past. It is happening right now, in your pocket, on your phone screen, and in the financial decisions you are about to make.
Look at the stock market today. Trillions of dollars are traded every day, not by humans, but by algorithms. These are Klein's prodigal children. If Klein used mathematics to understand the world, today's Wall Street hedge funds use mathematics to exploit the world. They build quantitative models of extreme complexity, hunting for the tiniest price deviations to make a profit. Do you feel a sense of intellectual superiority, thinking that humans have conquered the market? Think again. Remember the painful lesson of long-term capital management in 1998. This fund was run by Nobel laureates themselves, using the most perfect mathematical models, descendants of Klein's thinking. They believed risk had been calculated down to the 6th decimal point. They believed they couldn't lose. The result? They collapsed in a matter of weeks, nearly bringing down the entire global financial system. Why? Because their models had no variable for human panic. When people are terrified, mathematical laws are thrown out the window.
So, did Lawrence Klein fail? Looking at the deviations in annual economic forecasts, skeptics might sneer. Economists are just blind fortune tellers touching an elephant. But let's be fair. Before Klein, we drove in complete darkness. After Klein, we have headlights. Even if the headlights only illuminate 50 meters ahead, and sometimes the fog is too thick, rendering them useless, driving with lights is still 1 billion times better than driving in the dark. Lawrence Klein's true legacy is not accurate numbers. His legacy is a common language. Thanks to him, when the U.S. Federal Reserve talks about inflation and the Bank of Japan talks about inflation, they are talking about the same thing, measured by the same methodology. He created the operating system for global economics. Let me end with a cinematic image. Imagine Lawrence Klein in his final years. He passed away in 2013. Sitting watching a computer screen with streams of data running endlessly. He saw the Great Depression, World War II, the Cold War, the dot-com bubble, and the 2008 crisis. He understood a truth that we, who are often swept away by market emotions, need to etch into our minds. The model is the map, but the map is not the territory. Never place absolute trust in any forecast, whether it comes from a Harvard expert or a super AI. Do not fully entrust your financial future to a formula. Use models for reference, but use human intuition and prudence to decide. The economy is not a soulless machine. It is the sum of the heartbeats, fears, and greed of 8 billion people. No equation can fully contain that humanity, and perhaps that is a blessing. For if the future could be predicted with 100% accuracy, life would not be worth living. Uncertainty is the price of freedom.